Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Box, Bot, an AI-generated podcast by F1 fan who happens to be technology fan too. Welcome. It's great to be back doing our regular deep dive format.
Yeah, definitely.
Especially after that last one, which was a super deep dive into all the FIA and team chaos, this silly season buildup.
There was a lot going on there.
So much. It ended up being an extended deep dive, really. If you haven't heard it, do check it out.
For sure.
But today, we are shifting gears. We're looking ahead to the Austrian Grand Prix. We've got the Pirelli tire report here for the race at the Red Bull Ring, the track owned by the Austrian energy drink giant.
Indeed. And our mission really is to pull out the key bits of info from this report. What really matters for the teams, for strategy, for, how the race might play out in terms of tires.
Okay, let's dive into it then. First big thing popping out of the report, a format change. Austria has been a sprint weekend for, 3 years now?
That's right, 3 years.
But it's back to the standard format. 3 free practices, normal qualifying, then the race. Feels kind of classic.
It really does, and it's quite significant, actually.
How so? For the teams and their tire strategy, I mean.
Well, it fundamentally changes how they prepare, doesn't it? With 3 FP sessions, you just get so much more time to gather data, refine the setup, and crucially understand how the tires behave over longer runs.
Right, unlike the sprint format where you're almost straight into meaningful sessions.
Exactly. Less practice in sprint weekends often means more guesswork, maybe less optimal setups for the main race. Pirelli stuck with the same compounds as last year, C3 hard, C4 medium, C5 soft. That's the softest end of their range. But now, with that extra practice time, teams can really work on dialing those compounds in for this specific track.
Okay, and speaking of the track, the Red Bull Ring itself. What's fascinating here reading the report, you'd think an old abrasive track surface would just, chew through tires like high wear. But Pirelli says wear isn't the key factor. Why is that? Seems a bit weird.
It does seem counterintuitive, yeah. The surface is abrasive, no doubt. But the thing about the Red Bull Ring is, it's not actually that severe on tires in terms of lateral loads.
Because there aren't that many super high-speed long corners.
Precisely. Few corners overall, and not many that put huge, sustained side loadings on the tires. Instead, the main issue here, the main source of degradation, is thermal.
Heat.
Exactly. Heat. The layout has several really hard braking zones.
Yeah.
Followed immediately by big acceleration zones out of the corners, so you're constantly hitting the brakes hard, then hitting the throttle hard.
Right, that cycle of braking and accelerating.
Yeah, and that generates immense heat within the tire compound itself. It's not so much the surface friction wearing it down, it's more like the tire overheating from the inside, especially the rears, which handle the traction.
Okay, that makes sense. And then you add in potentially high temperatures in Austria in early summer.
That just makes it worse. Higher temp, high track temp. It compounds the problem. So yeah, it's this specific mix, abrasive surface, but low lateral load combined with heavy braking traction demands and potential heat. That creates this unique puzzle. How do you keep those tires from basically, boiling over?
Right, managing the internal temperature, not just the surface wear.
Okay. And that brings us to last year's race, 2024. The report says it was very linear for the first 2/3, and the two-stop strategy was clearly the way to go.
Yep, seemed pretty definitive.
It mentions drivers like Verstappen, Leclerc, Alonso, Sargent did 3 or more stops, but that wasn't planned strategy.
No, those were usually down to, unforeseen things happening, safety cars damage, that kind of stuff.
So strategically, what did last year tell us about the tires?
Well, the big takeaway was that the C4 medium and the C3 hard, they were the undisputed protagonists, the workhorses.
Right.
Most drivers started on the mediums. Zhu went for hards from the pit lane, I think. But yeah, medium and hard dominated the race stints.
And the soft, the C5. Very limited use. Verstappen used it for just 7 laps right at the end, after a stop he kind of had to make anyway. And Alonso had a brief run on them, probably for a fastest lap attempt.
So that tells you, even with it being the softest compound available.
It was just too fragile for proper race stints, likely due to that thermal degradation we talked about. It suggests that even with the format change giving more practice come Sunday, durability on the medium and hard is probably going to be much more important than, say, ultimate 1-lap pace on the softs. Making the tires last, managing that heat, that's likely the winning approach.
And we saw some drivers do that really well last year. The report highlights Daniel Ricciardo, 34 laps on the hard in his final stint.
Yeah, that's a solid stint there.
And Pierre Gasly did 29 laps on the medium. That's quite a long time given the thermal challenges.
Absolutely. Those are good benchmarks for effective tire management at this track. And if we connect this back to the bigger picture of the track itself, the Red Bull Ring has some really unique features.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Well, for starters, fewest corners on the whole calendar. Just 10.
Only 10. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And partly because of that, it has the shortest lap time. Valtteri Bottas set the record back in 2020. A 1 minute, 02.939. Insanely quick.
Under 63 seconds. That is quick.
And then there's the elevation change. It's second only to Spa-Francorchamps. There's a 63.5-meter difference between the highest and lowest points.
So over such a short lap, that's a big change, like a little roller coaster.
Pretty much. It creates 3 really distinct sectors. Sector 1 is mostly uphill, couple of straights. Then you brake hard for turn 3, and sector 2 is mainly downhill, quite rapidly down to turn 7.
Okay.
Then it climbs a bit again, before another drop down to the longest straight and the final 2 faster corners.
So that constant up and down, combined with the braking and acceleration, that must work the tires constantly, generating more heat.
You got it. It's constantly loading and unloading the tires in different ways, which adds to the thermal stress. And then you throw in 3 DRS zones.
Right, for overtaking.
Yeah, it helps make it one of the most action-packed races, usually. Plenty of chances to pass.
Okay. The report also mentions the track is usually well rubbered in right from the start, because it gets used a lot for bikes and cars.
Exactly. It hosts a lot of events, so the track surface typically has a good layer of rubber down even before F1 arrives.
Is that always good?
Generally, yeah. It means the grip levels come up quite quickly. Teams aren't waiting ages for the track to evolve like at some other places. But the big unknown here is always the weather.
Ah, yes, the Styrian Mountains.
Exactly. Early summer, you can get really high temperatures, which, as we said, makes tire management harder. But because it's in the mountains, surrounded by forests, the weather can just turn on a dime.
Sudden rain showers.
Very sudden. Clouds can build up incredibly fast. So you might have the perfect dry setup, the tires working beautifully, and then boom, downpour.
Teams have to be super reactive strategy-wise. Definitely keeps everyone on their toes. Okay, let's shift to the technical keywords, a section in the report. Pirelli talks about porosity. Sounds a bit scientific. What is porosity in an F1 tire context? How does it happen?
Yeah, it's a key term for understanding tire behavior under stress. Porosity basically develops from really intense mechanical and thermal stress. Think about all that heavy acceleration and braking we talked about, especially on a rough surface. The tire compound is constantly being deformed and heated. It builds up a lot of energy, a lot of heat inside the rubber itself.
Okay.
Now, if those internal temperatures get too high, higher than the tire's optimal operating window, you can start to form these tiny microscopic pockets or voids within the rubber. That's porosity. It's almost like the compound itself is starting to break down or bubble internally from the heat.
Wow, so it's not just surface wear, it's the structure degrading from the inside.
Exactly. And it's not good, obviously. It weakens the tire structure and can lead to much faster degradation, losing grip much quicker than you'd expect.
And I guess this leads directly to the other term we hear a lot, blistering. Is porosity the start of blistering?
Pretty much, yeah. Those microcavities, that porosity, they are like the seeds for blisters. If the conditions persist high heat, high stress, those tiny voids can grow. They can fill with gas or vapor that's created by the overheating rubber. And these form larger bubbles, which we call blisters, typically forming between the main carcass, the structure of the tire, and the tread, the bit that touches the road.
Because you need separation.
You can, yeah. Excessive heat can start to separate the layers of rubber, and these bubbles, these blisters, can then break open on the surface. They can evolve into visible craters or holes in the tread. You sometimes see them as dark streaks or patches of damage on the tire surface after a long stint.
Right, I've seen pictures of that. Nasty looking.
It is, and it's more likely to happen on tracks that maybe aren't fully rubbered in yet or where surface temperatures are really high. And of course, a very aggressive driving style, constantly pushing the tire over its limit, can trigger it too.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? How teams are constantly trying to fine-tune the car setup, the pressures, even coaching the driver on style.
Absolutely. All to keep the tire in that sweet spot, that optimal window, to avoid these kinds of internal failures like porosity and blistering. It gives you a deeper appreciation for the engineering and the strategy involved, definitely.
Totally. It's amazing science happening inside that rubber. Okay, let's zoom out a bit now. Put this race in context. The report notes this is the 38th Austrian Grand Prix, and F1's 40th race overall in Styria.
Yeah, it's got quite a history in the region. It wasn't always at this exact track or under this name. Started way back in '64, actually, at the Zeltweg military airfield nearby.
Right.
Then it moved to Spielberg in 1970. That was the original Österreichring famous, fast, quite dangerous circuit back then. It ran there until '87. Then F1 came back in '97 to a shortened version called the A1 Ring.
I remember the A1 ring.
Yeah. And then after another break, it returned in 2014, bought and revamped by Red Bull, hence the Red Bull Ring name. Plus, we had those 2 extra races, the Styrian Grand Prix, in 2020 and 2021 because of the pandemic schedule changes. So lots of F1 action here recently.
And when you look at who's been successful here, well, one name really dominates the modern era, Max Verstappen.
Oh, absolutely. His record here is phenomenal. 4 wins in the Austrian GP itself, plus that Styrian GP win in 21.
And the report says he leads in poles, too, with 5 and podiums with 8. Just dominant.
Completely owns the place, statistically speaking. But overall, 26 different drivers have won in Austria. 11 of those were world champions names like Prost, Schumacher, Hamilton.
So legends have won here, and George Russell won last year, interestingly.
That's right, yeah. And team-wise, it's a bit more mixed historically. Mercedes technically has the most wins in Styria if you include the Styrian GP with 7 total. But for the actual Austrian Grand Prix title, they're tied with Ferrari and McLaren on wins.
Ah, okay, so legacy team's still strong here.
Yeah.
Yep. And Ferrari actually leads in poles overall with 8, and they dominate the podium count with 29 finishes in the top 3. Interesting. So while Red Bull Ring feels like Red Bull's home turf now, Ferrari and McLaren have deep roots here too.
Definitely. And underpinning all this racing, all this history, you've got the tire supplier, Pirelli.
Right, playing a huge part.
Hugely important. Pirelli's been around since 1872, involved in motorsport for, 128 years now. It's incredible. They have this whole race-to-road philosophy. What they learn in F1 helps develop better road tires. And they've been the sole F1 tire supplier, the global tire partner, since 2011. So integral to modern F1 performance and safety. Plus, they supply tires to hundreds of other championships, too. And they're aiming for carbon neutrality by 2030, which is a significant goal.
It really helps you appreciate the layers, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The history, the technology, the company behind the tires.
Okay, so wrapping this up, given everything we've unpacked about the Red Bull Ring, the short lap, the elevation, there's really tricky thermal tire issues, the unpredictable weather, what do you think, for you listening, will be the single most critical factor for success this year? Is it just going to be raw speed in qualifying? Or will it come down to who manages those tires best on Sunday? Or maybe just keeping the drivers from being too aggressive and cooking the rubber? Something to think about. We will catch you on the next episode of Bot. I guess you made it this far, so now would be a great time to like and subscribe. That's it for now, and we will see you on the next one.